Today, we are going through the top 10 fatal epidemics in history. Our criteria for ranking these epidemics are death toll, how widespread the disease was, how long the epidemic lasted, and severity of symptoms. Number 10. The Hong Kong flu. It has killed an estimated 1 to 5 million people. This particular strain originated in Hong Kong, China, and spread to other Asian countries. It even spread to the United States and killed around 34,000 people in just the United States alone. It lasted from 1968 to 1970. Some symptoms are headaches, fevers, muscle aches, sore throats, cough, runny noses, and sneezing. Number 9. The Antonine Plague. It's suspected that at least 2,000 people were dying a day in Rome, eventually adding up to around 5 million people. This mysterious disease mainly stayed within the Roman Empire. It's actually named after the Roman Emperor Marcus Antoninus Augustus. It started in 165 AD and ended in 180 AD. Many people think that this disease was either smallpox or measles because of the symptoms displayed. Some of the symptoms were fever, diarrhea, pharyngitis, and skin rashes. Number 8. The AIDS epidemic. About 30 million people have died from AIDS or HIV since the first sighting of AIDS. The specific number of cases related strictly to AIDS is around 14 million deaths since the beginning. AIDS has become a global phenomenon, but has had isolated epidemics in the United States. The U.S. has around 1.1 million people living with HIV. 15% of the people infected with HIV or AIDS don't know they are infected. The beginning of the AIDS epidemic started in 1981 and remains a prominent threat. This disease is transmitted through body fluids, so primarily through sexual contact. It attacks the immune system. If a person is infected, they can experience pain in the abdomen, cough, fatigue, fever, loss of appetite, excessive sweating, and red blotches on the skin. Number 7. The 6th cholera epidemic. Cholera is a nasty reoccurring disease, and it has killed around 1.5 million people in just its 6th epidemic only. During 1817, in India, there was the first start of cholera, and it spread to the rest of Asia, parts of Africa, and Europe. It eventually stopped around 1823, attributed to a particularly harsh winter. Cholera has been around for centuries, but its most notable outbreak started in the 19th century. Since then, it has been controlled but not completely eradicated. The disease stems from contaminated water. That's why it still exists in third world countries today. Some symptoms are pain in the abdomen, nausea, severe diarrhea, and vomiting. Number 6. The North American smallpox epidemic. It's unknown the exact number of people and soldiers killed, but it's thought to be somewhere in the low millions. North America was introduced to it from the European settlers. During the American Revolutionary War, there was no cure or treatment for smallpox, so soldiers were dying from complications of the disease. Some of the earliest known instances of smallpox occurred in ancient Egypt around the 19th and 20th dynasties. For this specific epidemic, it occurred from 1775 to 1782. The incubation period is around 2 weeks, but someone during this isn't contagious to others. Symptoms include high fever, rash or small bumps, body aches, and sores. Number 5. The Cocoliskli epidemic. It's estimated that there was 7 to 17 million deaths among the natives of Mexico. It was thought that it killed around 80% of the native population. Despite the high mortality rate, this was an isolated epidemic centralized in Mexico. It was thought to have come from rodents and pests. This particular outbreak lasted from 1545 to 1576. The symptoms are high fever, severe headache, vertigo, black tongue, dark urine, and dysentery. Number 4. The Plague of Justinian. There was an estimated 30 to 50 million people that died due to the Justinian plague. This plague is thought to be closely related to the Black Death, while the plague of Justinian occurred first. Scientists found similarities among their microbes. It affected Asia, North Africa, Arabia, and Europe in the 6th century. It lasted from 542 CE to 750 CE, about 225 years. Several symptoms are fever, headache, chills, swollen or tender lymph nodes, abdominal pain, and gangrene. Number 3. The Black Death. There are no exact numbers for the death toll, but it's an estimated 50 to 75 million. The plague has a vague beginning, but it's thought to have originated in Asia. The first appearance from it was in the early to mid-1300s. It was in the eastern parts of Asia and eventually migrated. The Black Death finally reached Europe in October 1347. Around 12 ships from the Black Sea arrived in Europe, and at the docks it was discovered that most of the sailors were deceased or severely ill. The disease resurfaced many times throughout later history. The immense improvement of medical practices have greatly diminished the occurrence of the plague, but they haven't completely eradicated the disease. The incubation period for the Black Plague is 2 to 6 days, but there were stories about people going to sleep completely healthy and they would be dead in the morning. It primarily attacks the lymphatic system. Some of the symptoms include fever, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, and black pus and blood-filled boils. Number 2. The tuberculosis epidemic. During the late 1800s and early to mid-1900s, 1 out of every 7 Americans and Europeans were killed by tuberculosis. Just last year in 2018, 1.6 million people died from TB. TB is all over the world, but in the 18 and 1900s, it was primarily in Europe and America. Many patients were in sanatoriums, which are an establishment for the medical treatment of people who are convalescing or have a chronic illness. They would be treated for their symptoms, but at the time there was no cure and there still isn't a concrete cure. The first outbreak recorded was on March 24, 1882, and slowed down in the mid-1900s. Tuberculosis is usually a disease that is specifically focused in the lungs or the respiratory system. People can have TB without having symptoms for extended periods of time, but the usual incubation period is 2 to 12 weeks. Some of the symptoms include persistent coughing lasting 3 or more weeks, coughing up blood, chest pains, weight loss, fatigue, fever, chills, and loss of appetite. And finally, number 1, the Great Influenza Epidemic of 1918, or the Spanish flu. The estimated death toll is 20 million to 50 million, but since medical records weren't kept, many believe the number could be as high as 100 million. This epidemic is the most deadly in history, and in fact it killed more U.S. soldiers than World War I. The flu doesn't have a specific place where it originated, but it spread worldwide in January 1918. Surprisingly, it ended in only 1919. Due to the rapid spread of the flu to the whole world and the extremely high death toll, it was ranked number 1 on our list. The flu affected 1/3 of the world's population and killed so many in such a short time, so if it didn't end, it could have been catastrophic. From the time of exposure, it takes around 24 hours to about 5 days for the initial symptoms to start. Some symptoms are fever, chills, fatigue, and normal cold-like symptoms. Specifically, the 1918 epidemic attacked the bronchial tubes and opened up victims' lungs to pneumonia. With their already compromised immune systems, it was a deadly combination.